Tom Horn was born in the rural northeastern part of Scotland County, Missouri, as Thomas Horn, Jr. on November 21, 1860. Growing up, Tom was known to be smart and tough, with an excellent ear for speech. At the age of 14, he left home and took up various livestock and stage driving jobs in Kansas and New Mexico, ultimately finding himself in Arizona territory. While still in his teens, Tom's talents landed him a job as a scout for the United States Army, working for Al Sieber, Chief of Scouts. Tom's language skills proved to be useful in his campaigns against the Apache, where he quickly picked up Spanish and even some of the Apache language. In 1886, Tom escorted the Army column that captured the legendary Apache leader Geronimo for the final time. This success earned Tom quite the reputation, and in 1891 he was hired by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to pursue bandits who had robbed the Denver and Rio Grande train near Cannon City, Colorado. Over the next decade, Tom worked on various jobs for the Pinkertons. Tom Horn arrived in Wyoming in the late 1880s or early 1890s. He was a skilled individual whose services were secretly solicited by some of the region's most prominent ranchers, including Ora Haley, John Coble, Coble's partner Frank Bosler, and the Swan Land and Cattle Company. These ranchers were struggling to survive in a business that had once made them rich. Just a decade earlier, they had ruled their ranges like private fiefdoms, stocking them with more cattle than the land could support. In the 1880s, the cattle industry boomed as prices peaked and more money flowing in. However, this influx of capital also brought more cattle to the land, causing a beef glut. Prices began to fall, yet the ranchers could not think of anything to do but acquire even more cattle. This only weakened the ranges further and drove prices even further down. When a severe drought hit in 1886, followed by the terrible winter of 1886-1887, the cattle business was nearly wiped out. Many ranchers in Wyoming were forced out of business due to a variety of difficulties. Some of these ranchers blamed cattle theft for their problems and began to publicly accuse others of rustling. However, rustling was just one of many challenges facing ranchers who owned large tracts of land. In 1889, two homesteaders, Ella Watson and Jim Averill, were lynched by cattlemen on the Sweetwater River who claimed they were forced to make an example of thieves. Despite this crime going unpunished, the leading men of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association led a private army of 50 men into Johnson County in northern Wyoming in 1892 to kill suspected rustlers there. In this violent and bloody attack, 2 men were murdered, but the crimes went unpunished. Thomas Sturgis, the secretary of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, shared the view of many association members and newspapers under their control that sympathetic juries were to blame for the cattle theft problem. In 1886, he stated that it was challenging to obtain an indictment from a grand jury, even with compelling evidence of the accused party's guilt. According to Sturgis, there was a disturbing sympathy for cattle thieves both on the bench and in the jury room. He believed that the association couldn't bring these individuals to justice as they had no money at their disposal. Cattlemen were forced to take matters into their own hands to protect themselves outside of any association. Public outrage over the lynchings in Sweetwater and the invasion of Johnson County was widespread. The political influence of the cattlemen weakened, and sheep farmers began bringing their flocks onto land that the cattlemen had long claimed as their own. However, many cattlemen remained entrenched in their old ways, dealing with their woes in secret. Enter Tom Horn, whose arrival in Wyoming is not precisely known, but United States Marshal Joseph P. Rankin's correspondence shows he was in the state by May 1892. Rankin deputized Horn to investigate a crime in the aftermath of the Johnson County invasion. Horn was believed to be working for the Pinkertons at the same time. By 1895, Horn was likely working for private interest when he became a suspect in the murder of 2 settlers. The first victim, William Lewis, was an immigrant from England who settled on Horse Creek northwest of Cheyenne. Lewis had a criminal record, having been jailed in previous years for stealing clothing and cheating at faro. At the same time of his death, he was suspected of cattle theft and was under a court order not to butcher cattle. On July 31st, Lewis was loading a skinned beef into a wagon when suddenly 3 shots rang out and hit him, ending his life. The local authorities suspected that Tom Horn, a notorious outlaw, might have been involved in the crime, and he was promptly subpoenaed to appear at the coroner's inquest in Cheyenne. The inquest was attended by over a dozen witnesses, including Horn and rancher William L. Clay. Both Horn and Clay testified that Horn had been in Bates Hole, south of Casper, at the time of the murder, and therefore he was innocent. 2 months later, tragedy struck again in the neighboring county of Albany. Fred U. Powell, a well-liked homesteader, was found shot and killed on his property. The only person present at the time was his hired hand, Andrew Ross. Ross testified at the inquest that he heard one shot, found his employer's body, and fled the scene in fear for his safety. His wife Mary and young son Billy were away in Laramie. However, during the inquest, Billy was present in the courtroom and, upon seeing Tom Horn, cried out, "Mama, that's the man who killed Daddy." This statement became a major point of contention during Horn's trial years later, as the prosecutor used it against the detective investigating the Powell case. Nonetheless, the mystery of how Billy could identify Horn as the killer, despite not being present during the crime, remained unsolved. Horn's reputation as a notorious outlaw and the suspected murderer had been established well before the Powell incident. By 1895, rumors of other killings and crimes had already solidified Horn's intimidating reputation in the community. Decades later, in 1914, Philadelphia physician Charles Penrose wrote his recollections of the Johnson County invasion in 1892. Although he left before the killing began, Penrose included a vivid description of Tom Horn as he was in 1895, as told to him by W.C. Billy Irving, the president of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association during the 1890s. At the time, Wyoming Governor W.A. Richards was facing cattle thefts on his ranches in northwest Wyoming. During a chance encounter, he and W.C. Billy Irving, president of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, discussed their troubles with each other as they walked towards the Capitol building, where both of their offices were located. Irving recounted a story to Philadelphia physician Charles Penrose about how the governor expressed a desire to meet with notorious outlaw Tom Horn, who was known for his ability to deal with rustlers. However, Richards was hesitant to invite Horn to his office. Irving came up with a plan to arrange a meeting between the three of them. Later that day, Horn met with the governor and Irving in Irving's office at the other end of the hall. During the meeting, the governor was nervous, but Horn remained cool and talked carefully. Horn stated that he would either drive every rustler out of Bighorn County or take no pay other than $350, which he needed to buy 2 horses and a pack outfit. When he finished the job to the governor's satisfaction, he would receive $5,000. Horn said, "Whenever everything else fails, I have a system which never does. I have a system which never does." After Horn left, the governor showed an inclination to shorten the interview. He said to Irving, "So that is Tom Horn. A very different man from what I expected to meet. Why, he is not bad-looking and is quite intelligent, but a cool devil, ain't he?" Horn continued to work as a detective through the late 1890s. However, in 1900, Horn was suspected of murdering 2 thieves and Matt Rash Isam Dart in Browns Park, where the Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming borders intersect. A foreman for the ranchers who hired Horn was quite firm, in an account written down 20 years later, that Horn had done the crimes. However, the crimes received little notice in Wyoming. As the investigation into the Nickell crime in July 1901 continued, the county commissioners in Cheyenne decided to hire Joe LaForce, a former stock detective and deputy United States Marshal, to investigate the case. In December of that same year, LaForce received a series of letters from a former boss in Miles City, Montana, detailing the need for a range detective to investigate rustling in the area. LaForce saw an opportunity to lure Tom Horn into responding to the letters and forward them to him. Horn took the bait and left John Coble's place in Bosler, where he had been living at the time, to travel to Cheyenne on Saturday, January 11, 1902. He most likely spent the night drinking and then accompanied LaForce to the United States Marshal's office on 16th Street the next morning. Once Joe LaForce was hired to investigate the Nickell crime, he set up a trap to capture Tom Horn's incriminating words. LaForce arranged for a stenographer and a witness to hide behind a locked door while he led Horn into a conversation that included several damaging statements. Among them, Horn bragged about the killing, saying, "It was the best that I ever made and the dirtiest trick I did." The stenographer recorded and transcribed the comments, which were later used as crucial evidence in Horn's trial. The trial took place just before the November 1902 election and was mired in politics. Both the prosecutor, Walter R. Stoll, and the presiding judge, Richard Scott, were up for re-election, and the event garnered widespread newspaper coverage in Wyoming and Colorado. Despite Horn's defense team consisting of some of the most prominent lawyers in the state, including former Chief Justice of Wyoming Territory, John W. Lacey, and future federal judge T. Blake Kennedy, Horn's ego became his worst enemy on the stand. Horn's testimony destroyed the alibi that placed him 20 miles from the crime scene just an hour after the murder happened. As Horn's trial came to a close, his lawyers argued that all the evidence against him was circumstantial and that his supposed confession was just drunken boasting. However, prosecutor Walter R. Stoll argued that Horn had killed Willie Nickell to silence him from reporting his presence in the area. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the jurors accepted Stoll's argument as a motive for the crime. However, given the anti-Horn press coverage and their poorly enforced sequestration, they likely made up their minds before leaving the courtroom to deliberate. On November 20th, 1903, Horn was hanged at the Cheyenne jail. While it's possible that he was responsible for Nickell's death, there was no direct material or testimonial evidence to prove his guilt. As the story of Tom Horn's trial unfolded, many questions remained unanswered. His confession to LaForce was given while he was drunk and prone to boastful statements. Moreover, no other authorities investigated any other suspects, and it seemed that Horn was an easy target for the prosecution due to his reputation. However, the trial was not without controversy. Some lingering controversies persist over whether or not Horn was guilty of killing Willie Nickell and over the nature of the trial. Despite the uncertainties surrounding his case, one fact remains. Horn's conviction and execution represented a significant shift in Wyoming's political landscape. Goodbye, Tom Horn.